College Door regional webinar about data and implications for the Northeast region. My name is Peace Brandsberger at the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education and co-author of the Knocking at the College Door report. I'm your moderator today, and I am joined by several respondents who will provide thoughts about the high school graduate trends for the region, their state, and higher education enrollment access, state workforces, and state and institutional making. Before we get started, WICHE would like to thank ACT and the College Board for their generous financial support of Knocking at the College Door. Without their partnership and collaboration, these projections would not be possible. I would also like to thank the New England Board of Higher Education for collaborating on this webinar. First, a little housekeeping information. All attendees will be muted. However, you should be able to hear at this point. You can click on the small orange box on the right side of your screen to access the audio tab on the control panel, to connect via your computer speakers, or to access dial-in information. Since all attendees are muted, if you have a question or feedback, please enter it in the question box in the panel on the right of your screen. We will monitor and respond to incoming questions throughout and address some questions during the Q&A portion. You may download the copies of the Knocking at the College Door report and a packet of profiles for the Northeast from the handouts portion of the control panel. We are recording this webinar, and you will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording after the webinar. Lastly, you'll be directed to a brief evaluation at the end of the webinar when you leave. We rely on your feedback to help us develop useful resources, so we appreciate you taking the time to complete the short evaluation. Again, my name is Peace Brandsberger, and I will present the high school graduate trends as the first part of the webinar. Then we will hear from our panelists from the Massachusetts Department of Education, New Hampshire Community College System, and an experienced demographics and consumer markets expert. I'd like to preface my presentation about the trends with a few technical details. We use what is called a cohort survival ratio method to generate the projections. We gather the most recently available data from the Federal Common Core of data for public school students, which are 90% of the total, and from the Private School Survey for private religious and non-sectarian school students. For this edition of Knocking at the College Door, school year 2013-14 was the most recent data for the most part, with some variation across public and private schools. We use the student data to compute ratios, which show the quantitative patterns of progression from grade to grade and on to graduation. We use the 5 most recent years' patterns to project the number of students and eventually graduates into the future years. If we use just student data, however, we could only project about a decade out, so we add in data about births in recent years to project out further, about 18 years. Over the years, the number of U.S.-born kids and how they progress through school has been the primary determinant of the high school graduate trends. We don't explicitly model or quantify the many factors that influence how students progress through school, things such as being retained in a grade or promoted early, moving between schools, locales, or states, policy changes, or economic or other environmental factors. These sorts of things are implicit in the enrollment and graduate counts and progression ratios. We can't know exactly the amount, for example, that immigration adds to high school graduate numbers, but our analysis indicates it was notable in prior years of high immigration and has reduced recently with declines in immigration. We summarize important details such as these about the underlying data and the methodology in Appendix C of the report. On the whole, our analysis indicates that any data or methodology nuances have only marginal effects on the overall trends. However, please do enter any specific data or methodology questions in the question box, and we'll pay attention to them as we go. So let's begin with the national trends for high school graduates. The big national headlines are that despite the recent improvements in the official high school graduation rate, the sheer number of youth is moderating. This leads to a slowdown and even declines in the number of high school graduates, in large part as a result of long-predicted decreases in the number of white youth, which outpace even substantial increases among non-white student populations. On this slide, These two charts illustrate the projected national trends. The chart on the left shows the populations of public school graduates by race, ethnicity, plus graduates of private schools, from the first projected year to the last. The top black line shows the total and counts at several points in time over these 18 years. The line chart on the right indicates the year-over-year increase or decrease in the number from each population of graduates over these years, compared to the numbers where they started at the last confirmed school year, 2012-13. In total, after almost 2 decades of steady growth in the number of high school graduates averaging about 2% annually, the nation reached a high of about 3.44 million grads around 2013. Between now and about 2025, there is virtually no increase projected, except for a few years of small increase around 2025, when the nation will produce between 3.5 and 3.6 million high school graduates. After the year 2025, the number of high school graduates nationally is projected to decrease steadily to about 3.3 million, or about 7% fewer by the early 2030s than about this point in time. These decreases in the outer years arise from long-predicted contraction of the white youth population and are compounded by dramatic birth declines for all populations during and after the recent Great Recession. In other words, a recent baby bust in the last 7 to 8 years. Looking at the line chart on the right and following the blue line at the bottom, white public high school graduates are projected to decrease by 17% by the early 2030s, about 250,000 fewer graduates than in 2013. Barely a decade and a half ago, around the year 2000, whites represented 70% of all high school graduates. They are projected to be 52% of public school graduates by the end of the projections. Unforeseen increases in the number of non-white high school graduates could tip the balance to majority-minority within the span of the projections. Following the green line at the top, Hispanic high school graduates are the primary growth population, increasing almost 50% by the year 2025. From around 640,000 in 2013 to almost 900,000. During the growth years, the additional number of Hispanic graduates nationally more than offsets the decline of white graduates. But then even Hispanic graduates are projected to decrease in number between the year 2025 and the early 2030s as a result of the recent birth declines, which were greatest among Hispanics. Asian Pacific Islander graduates, which is in the lighter gray shaded line, are the only population projected to increase throughout the projections, but they are only about 5 to 7% of the total number of graduates nationally, so their numbers don't shift the overall trend of decline. Black high school graduates in the gold color line are about 15% of the national total, and they will be relatively steady in number throughout the projections. The numbers for American Indian students nationally are very small compared to the other student populations, but overall there is a small decline. And the final line here in the darker gray, high school graduates from private, religious, and independent schools are projected to decrease nationally by about 26%, or about 80,000 graduates, in reflection of their largely white student demographic, but also due to significant contraction among religious schools over the last decade or so. The national projections mask significant variation by region and among the states. Here we see those regional differences. In the line chart, the number shown for each region is the region's high point in the number of high school graduates. The South, at the top, is the engine of growth for high school graduates. By 2025, it will generate about 10% more graduates than in 2013 and is primarily responsible for the growth predicted for the nation around the year 2025. About 45% of the nation's graduates will be from the South region by 2030. The West, the next line down, overtook the Midwest region in terms of numbers of high school graduates produced by 2010 and now produces about 30% of the nation's high school graduates. The West region has long been the most diverse region. Perhaps the most surprising for the West is the rapid contraction in high school graduates that is projected after 2025, which arises from dramatic declines in the number of Hispanic graduates. The Northeast and Midwest reached their high points for high school graduates in school year 2009 and 10. The number of graduates from these regions have already begun decreasing and will continue to decline throughout the projected years. I should mention that our definition of the Northeast includes the New England states, but also some states that would be considered mid-Atlantic for some purposes. The map on the slide indicates the WICHE regions. Now we'll look at the trends for the Northeast region and states. The Northeast has generated about 640,000 total graduates annually in recent past years. It is not projected to reach that number again. Despite some year-by-year variation, the number of high school graduates from the Northeast will decrease 5% to about 607,000 on average through the year 2025. Graduating classes in the early 2030s will be about 12% smaller in number than their highs around 2010, with about 563,000 graduates on average. On this slide, we see again two charts showing the projections, in this case for the Northeast region. On the left, you see the projected relative composition of the Northeast high school graduating classes by race ethnicity plus the private school graduates. The line chart on the right shows the relative increases or decreases in number. Hispanic high school graduates from the Northeast states increased by almost 60% by their high point around 2025, from about 76,000 to 121,000 graduates, and then the number contracts somewhat in relation to the recent baby bust. The number of Asian Pacific Islander high school graduates will also increase about 40%, from 37,000 to between 50 and 55,000 after 2025. But these increases are not enough to offset the absolute sheer decline among white graduates, which are projected to decline year over year virtually without pause, from a little over 350,000 to just about 270,000 between 2013 and the early 2030s, a decrease of about 25% over these almost 15 years. The Black student population is relatively stable at 70 to 75,000 graduates per year through 2025, until they also decrease in number in the outer years. There are between 1,500 to 2,000 American Indian graduates in most years. For class of 2013, non-white graduates were about 34% of total public school graduates. They will be about 46% of the total by the early 2030s. Private high school graduates were recently about 13% of all graduates in the Northeast region. Their numbers will decrease about 25%, from around 85,000 to 60,000 by the early 2030s. Private high school graduates in the Northeast produce almost 30% of the nation's private high school graduates. Private high schools in the Northeast produce almost 30% of the nation's private high school graduates. For that reason, I'll spend a minute behind the scenes showing the reason for the declines in the Northeast private high school grads. This view of school enrollments explains why there is such a dramatic decline underway for private high school graduates overall, but not necessarily with all types of private schools. Catholic schools on the left accounted for 60% of all private school enrollments in the school year 2001-02, and their enrollment declines through school year 2011-12 are the primary predictor of reduced numbers of private high school graduates over the next 15 years. Catholic school enrollments are shown here by elementary, middle, and high school grade, making clear that the 47% decrease in elementary enrollments over these years is the driving factor. The tall chart on the left shows, the smaller charts on the right side depict the same information for other religious and private non-sectarian schools. At about the same relative scale, where it was 800,000 on the left, it is 400,000 in each of the charts on the right. Other religious and non-sectarian private schools in the Northeast have fared much better over this period and are in fact gaining students in recent years. Finally, we'll take a quick look at each of the states in the Northeast, again, the region as WICHE defines it. On our website, www.knocking.wiche.edu, you can browse each state's trends in the online state profile dashboards. We welcome you to take a look at that as we proceed and send in any questions in the question box if you have them. This table shows the state's relative trends with graduates over the next 10 to 15 years. The states that contribute the greatest number of graduates toward the Northeast region's total are basically stable out to 2025 and beyond, those on the top. Whereas the remaining states, those that are more typically considered the New England states, their high school graduating classes are already contracting in size and decline pretty dramatically by the early 2030s. On these last two slides, we show the relative composition of public high school graduates by race ethnicity again, and including the private school graduates at the bottom of each chart. The states are ordered by greatest to least number of graduates, with New York here at the top, used to demonstrate the bullet points that are shown. The first one with each chart is the average number of graduates projected per year from class 2014 through class of 2032. And the second point will be by how much non-white graduates will increase as a percent of all graduates. Speaking to New York ranks as the third highest producing state in terms of the number of high school graduates and contributes about a third of the region's total. It is projected to have a relatively stable output throughout the projection series and then decline slightly in the outer years related to the baby bust. On the other hand, it also exemplifies the trend of diversification. Already about 45% of public school graduates in New York are non-white. This will increase to about 57% of the total over the next 15 years as the white population decreases while the non-white population increases. Pennsylvania generates almost a quarter of the region's graduates. It is projected to have relatively flat numbers of high school graduates through 2025, but end with about 9% fewer graduates by 2032. There's strong enough growth of Hispanic and Asian graduates in the state, but it is relatively smaller numbers compared to the majority white population. Next, New Jersey generates about 17% of the region's total, and among these larger Northeast states has the greatest declines. There will be about 16% fewer graduates from New Jersey by the early 2030s, but it mirrors the rate of diversification in New York, with non-white graduates increasing from 43% to 56% of the total. The number of high school graduates from Massachusetts will decrease gradually out through the early 2030s, down 12% by 2032, driven by a 30% decrease in the number of white high school graduates. At the same time, the number of Hispanic and Asian graduates increases rapidly. And here are the trends among the smaller Northeast states, each of which are projected to have 17 to 26% fewer graduates overall by the end year of 2032. And none of which are expected to exceed current numbers of high school graduates, not even in 2025 when the nation and many other states see a brief new high. In most cases for these states, it's evident from the charts that the declines are largely a result of contraction in the population of white high school graduates, which is the blue portion on the charts. Connecticut and Rhode Island have substantial non-white populations, but even rapid increase in their numbers is not enough to offset the much larger decrease numbers of white high school graduates. The other states here will also experience rapid increases in non-white graduates, but in relatively small numbers. I will conclude this portion by pointing you to the website again, www.knocking.witchy.edu, where you can obtain a variety of information, including the report, printable data dashboards, state profiles, downloadable data in Excel file form, and recorded versions of webinars and prior presentations. So before turning this over to our panelists, I'm going to pause for a minute and see if there are any questions in the queue that need to be answered. While I do that, I'm going to send out a poll question. If you'll take a look at that, please, it'll give us a sense of who's on the phone and what are the challenges you're facing. And that will help our panelists speak in their portion. We will pause momentarily. Okay, so the poll is, we'll wind it down over the next several seconds, and what we're seeing from among the question being what is your greater challenge, the increasing numbers from new student population, so minority populations, or is it the overall reduction in the number of youth and high school graduates? It appears about 2/3 of the audience is weighing in with the overall reduction being their greater challenge, with a small portion of the audience also saying that it's something else. And so now I'm going to open this up. If our panelists could be sure that from their end they are unmuted so that they are able to speak. First, I'm going to ask Candace Williams, the Associate Director of Policy and Research with the New England Board of Higher Education, to say a few words.
Thanks, Peace, and thanks for all of your work on the Knocking at the College Door report. I quickly would like to highlight a few points about what the data says for New England as a region specifically. As you mentioned, in the Northeast, graduating classes in the early 2030s will be about 12% smaller than the largest classes around 2010. In New England, this decline is even more stark, with a 14% decrease in the size of graduating classes just from 2016 through to 2032. Similarly, New England is not expected to experience the increase of minority graduates that other Northeastern states will. In the Northeast generally, for every 10 white graduates lost, 8 Hispanic graduates are produced, close to the replacement rate. But in New England, only 4 graduates of any minority background are produced for every 10 white graduates lost. This speaks to the larger demographic and economic challenges in New England, and particularly the most northern states in the region. So with that being said, I'm really looking forward to hearing our speakers' insights on the data and its wider implications. Thanks.
Thank you, Candace. Now I'm going to ask each of the panelists to have some opening remarks, 2 to 3 minutes apiece, to briefly describe their organization and role and the work they do, and give us their primary impression about the trends. So I'm going to start with Ross Cattell with the New Hampshire Community College System. Ross, if you could introduce yourself and tell us what you think about these trends as we've described them, or what you're experiencing.
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon. First of all, the Community College System of New Hampshire is a 7-college coordinated system of community colleges serving all regions of the state of New Hampshire. We have 28,000 students across the state. A large majority, 93% of our students, are New Hampshire residents. 60% of the students are under 25. And about 10% and growing are under 18. So the high school graduating class and the size, and in the case of New Hampshire, the declining size of the high school graduating class is very much a challenge for the community college system and for the state more broadly. You know, it was interesting to see the response to the poll that the greatest challenge for the majority of participants today is that overall reduction of high school graduates. And New Hampshire is facing demographic headwinds, not only for the community college, but for the state's economy. We have the highest percentage decline projected for high school graduates, as indicated in your data. And this declining high school graduating class is particularly challenging in the context of currently New Hampshire has the lowest unemployment rate in the U.S. at 2.6%, and many businesses across many industries are poised for growth, but there's not that pipeline coming through our high schools and into our community colleges for those to be employees for those industries that are poised to grow in New Hampshire. So we very much at the community college system see that connection between the demographic trends as highlighted in your report and analysis and the future economic needs for the state of New Hampshire. In addition, the demographic challenges that were highlighted here are compounded in New Hampshire by the fact that we have in New Hampshire the second highest percentage of high school graduates going to college who go out of state. In New Hampshire, about half of our high school graduates who go on to college are going out of state. And so on top of the declining high school graduating class, we have the challenge of many of our high school graduates are leaving the state for college, and that makes them less likely to come back to the state. So these demographic challenges are front and center for the community college system. And so that's why, and I could describe the specific efforts later, but that is absolutely why the community college system has been focused on increasing the retention of high school graduates and the matriculation of high school graduates into our colleges, because without increasing our retention of high school graduates and without increasing the proportion of high school graduates who go on to college within our state, we are not going to be able to help address the workforce and economic challenges looking forward for the state of New Hampshire.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you for that really insightful perspective. So we're going to ask Niall to speak up and introduce yourself and the work that you do. And in fact, Ross just kind of set the stage very well for you in speaking about what is happening as kids get through the school systems and then their transition and movement into the workforce or into college. So Niall, if you want to go ahead and say a few words.
Hi folks, this is Niall Fuentes from the great state of Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I'm a College and Career Readiness Coordinator at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. As the title of our agency probably describes, we work mostly around the K-12 aspect of this educational continuum. However, in our office, we really work pretty closely with our own Department of Higher Education, who works with the 28 public colleges, community colleges in UMass system to serve our kids. Just a real quick reaction to the data, mostly because the 2032 stuff scares the hell out of me. I've been kind of looking at more current issues that we've been facing. We are facing the same thing as in the data. A large growth in Latino students is what we're really facing, and not necessarily in a bad way, but these are students who are traditionally first-generation college kids who do not graduate from high school at the highest levels. We have, however, in Massachusetts, the lowest dropout rates in our state's history and our highest graduation rates. So we've done a pretty good job in working these subgroups, but still have enormous achievement gaps, particularly between our growing populations of Hispanic students and English language learners that may or may not be Hispanic. We're a national leader in the overall percentage of students who go on to college. We have 51.5% of our adults ages 25 to 54 have college diplomas that hold degrees. So the issue is, of course, we've got to maintain that because we are a state that is built on brain rather than brawn. So we need to continue to have this growth in college graduates, as most of our states do, in order to kind of fulfill and keep our economic competitiveness. We've done a good job, again, locally with having more students graduate from high school. However, if you really look at just a real quick demographic snapshot, for every 100 white students that entered 9th grade in September 2008, 2/3, exactly 67 of them, entered college in fall 2013. That means right after high school. They went through their 4 years, they graduated, 67 of those 100 went on to college. For every 100 Latino students, and remembering that's our largest growing population, it's 30. So you're talking about less than half the percentage of students who enter college who are Latino doing white. And for African Americans, it's 42. So we really need to work very hard, and I hope to be able to discuss this a little later, around what this college going gap looks like and how we need to work on it locally, I mean statewide and locally, to improve that. Additionally, just a real quick piece around this, we have some inner suburb districts, inner cities, not inner cities, but close to the city, close to Boston, who have huge growth in populations. These tend to be upper middle class families that are moving out there, while some of our rural and urban districts are really declining enrollment. I think Boston is down about 10%, mostly due to very high real estate prices. So you're having a case where we have more Hispanic students, certainly, and particularly in our urban areas. But at the same time, we have larger population growth in our suburban districts, which are traditionally more successful in sending kids on to college. So there's a real dichotomy here, a real bifurcation, if you would, and we can probably discuss this as we move along. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Niall. So Peter Francis with, I'm sorry. So Peter, I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce yourself so that I don't mangle that. And if you can give us, a few short, high-level impressions about these data from your perspective.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me on this, and I applaud Witchy for this incredible piece of demographic research that you all have done, showing these projections not just for the Northeast and New England, but for all of the 50 states. I have been for many years honored to be serving on the board of directors along with Ross of the New England Economic Partnership. And just what it says, the New England Economic Partnership is a region-wide organization trying to foster research and other work about the economy of the region. And it is, with the exception of the Boston metropolitan area, which Niall talked about, is in serious jeopardy. It is getting so serious that the state of New Hampshire, the state legislature, has a bill before it, which I believe will pass, to conduct or to commission a demographic study for the entire state in an effort to see what the impact has been, but most importantly, how we can turn this decline that you've talked about around. Outmigration from the New England states, in fact the entire Northeast, is very substantial, and I think is likely to continue. But making projections is a difficult thing, and I'm a little nervous about putting all of my eggs in a basket that predicts what's going to happen in 3032. A lot of things can happen between now and then, including changes in public policy. 10 years ago, I got together with my co-author, who turns out to now be the Commissioner of Agriculture of the state of New Hampshire, Lorraine Merrill. And Lorraine and I wrote a book called Communities and Consequences about the decline in student populations and the decline in young people in particular. We were thinking at that time of high school populations. And unfortunately, in 10 years, not much has changed. I like to quote Pogo when I talk about the demographics of New England and particularly New Hampshire. And Pogo said, "We have met the enemy, sir, and he is us." There is a widespread belief, which I've never been able to shake, that more children equals higher property taxes. And so the small towns in New England and small school districts, of which there are approximately 1,000, work very hard to keep the student populations down, with the false belief that if we can only reduce the population of children, we can save money on our property taxes. This is, I believe, at the core of the reason why New Hampshire showed the fastest and most steepest decline in the number of high school graduates. Ross is very fortunate. He still has hair in his head. I've torn all of mine out just being furious at this self-destruction of our future population, because it has enormous implications for the workforce both today and in the future. So with that, I have some suggestions as to what colleges could do. I've given a number of talks to both private schools and colleges about the demographic trends and what they might do. And I've even written a couple of small pieces for Ross in particular, talking about the community college system, which is crucial to the future of New Hampshire. With that, I will stop.
Oh, well, thank you so much, for, I guess, a real sort of wake-up call words about, and the perspective that you bring to this. So, Ross, would you mind responding to sort of picking up from where Peter just left off left off and give us some thoughts about, if you will, solution or approaches or some of the imperatives that you see with the community college's role in this?
Sure. As I mentioned before, we're focused on increasing retention of high school graduates and increasing matriculation into post-secondary education. And to really do that from the community college perspective, access and affordability are key. And within that, to target lower and middle income families and students in rural areas with traditionally low rates of college matriculation. So to address the affordability challenge, what we've done is actually over the last 5-year period, we've lowered tuition to increase the affordability and increase enrollment in our colleges. And enrollment is not the only thing that's important. Completion is important. So we're focusing on enhancing student success and focusing on guided pathways to student academic and economic success. And our real goal is to be leading in advancing social mobility. And our colleges are now among the top 10% among community colleges in terms of the percentage of students who come to our colleges from the bottom quintile of income categories, and then after they graduate, they move to the top quintile. 1 out of every 6 of our graduates have made that move from the bottom quintile to the top quintile. And that means that students that come to our doors, that enroll with us, that engage with us with our education and training programs, could advance economically, and that's, I think, the best way to retain our young people. We can't fight some of those demographic headwinds that which he has highlighted, but we have to recognize them and act within the context of that sharp decline in the graduating class in New Hampshire. We're particularly focused on growing partnerships and programs with high schools for that pathway from the high school into our colleges to improve matriculation rates and retention rates. And we're doing this with our dual enrollment programs where students get dual credits in high school and in college. And we have that in virtually every high school in New Hampshire, about 100 high schools across the state. And that's a fast-growing program. And then that program, what we're doing is aligning our dual enrollment program with pathways. And these pathways are in particular industry and education and training programs within high demand areas in middle skilled occupations so that students who normally wouldn't be attracted to post-secondary education or staying in New Hampshire from our high school programs, they then obtain some advanced training and education, and we ensure that that student matriculates in a post-secondary program and then stays in the state in New Hampshire, and that helps us address those headwinds that you highlighted in your report.
Thank you. And actually, Niall, I'd like to hear what you think about that, since it's collaboration on dual credit programs, or in previously speaking, you had mentioned early college designation, some other initiatives. If you could speak to what you see as.
Sure. And yeah, Ross and I have to go talk sometime too, so this sounds really good. First of all, I just want to make a kind of overall statement about this. I think we need to do a much better job, meaning me and everyone else here, convincing policymakers and taxpayers alike that closing these achievement gaps in Massachusetts' case, because we have this growing population of Latinos and ELL students, is not just like a moral or social justice issue, but also critical to our continued economic growth and leadership. If we can't do this, they're screwing themselves. We're screwing ourselves, in other words. But just real quickly, currently, and I'm going to speak a little bit for our Department of Higher Education as well, we have current college access programming, things like Gear Up, Upward Bound, and other type of TRIO programs that have really been successful in serving small parts of this population. And then some locally brewed programming, particularly in our larger districts in conjunction with higher education. But these are limited statewide, and local funding and state funding is really limited. And they're often creatures of good thinking by local K-12 and higher ed rather than just having a full system of this. So what we're trying to do, one of our big initiatives that we're trying to roll out is a high quality career pathways initiative. And I think some states may have also gotten this funding from J.P. Morgan Chase. It's, you know, it's $2 million. It's not a huge amount of money through New Skills for Youth to really start working on these innovation pathways that have a career orientation. So that's one of our high quality career pathways, these innovation pathways, but also really looking towards an early college designation. We've had some success with dual enrollment and kids taking concurrent enrollment and things of that nature, but we're really trying, both of our boards, our Board of Higher Education and our Board of Elementary and Secondary Education got together and really wanted to work on a designation process for early colleges that talks about 12 credits or more for students who are enrolled in high school, particularly around equity and getting kids that are first-generation college students to enroll in this program. So they're kind of like get their credits built up before they even enter higher education. So kids going with 12 or more credits entering particularly our community colleges, which are engines of growth for first-generation college students. I say this as a community college graduate myself, and part of it is going to be around our rebranding of, and I don't know how this is going to happen, of community colleges and having them become schools of choice for a lot of students. So these are big pieces. This early college designation could have huge opportunities for the future if we can kind of attach the funding to it necessary to have schools and their colleges create these partnerships.
Thank you. Those are really, you know, again, each of you has a different perspective given the setting of your state and where you sit relative to all these issues, and a lot of it overlaps. It is a fact that we've heard a lot about, or perhaps a little bit more about community colleges and their important role in this. But I'm wondering if Peter, if you could say a few words about the obvious important role of higher degrees and four-year degrees and onward in this, and in some remarks that you've made, you've mentioned the idea of affordability. So I feel like there's some overlap of talking about our college mix for the right mix of credentials, and then affordability is a big part of that.
It's a huge part of it, and Ross Cattell should get some sort of award. I don't know what kind of award is appropriate for reducing the tuition at his community colleges, because that is so important. Affordability is not just an idea. It's actually, in my view, an American tragedy, because in the last decade or so, we've managed to saddle millennials, the next generation of baby boomers called millennials, with over $1 trillion of student debt. And that $1 trillion monkey on their back, or a millstone if you want to call it that, has really given them a mortgage but no house. And as a result, they're not buying houses, they're not getting married, they're not having children to anywhere near the extent that their predecessors did, who didn't have that $1 trillion worth of debt. And so that is one of the issues that's coming to pass, and why the projections for the 2030s are so grim. I would suggest that this collaboration issue is really important. Ross talked about, I think, a little bit about his collaboration with employers. I know for a fact that, that he is working with New Hampshire employers to make sure that he has, they have trained people coming out of the community college system. But at the four-year level, at the four-year college level, it's an entirely different issue. There are 250, actually there's more than 250 colleges and universities in New England, a region of only 14 million people. And by the way, the out-migration from all of New England is quite substantial. And so we see 250 colleges and universities. Today, I would speculate that by 2030, we will be very lucky to have 200, and it may be even less than that. And so the question is, what do the presidents of each one of those 250 colleges or universities do over the next 10 or 20 years? And I suggest for your thinking that they had better develop some really serious and very well thought out marketing programs and specialization programs to decide what is their unique educational offering, and how possibly they can reduce their tuition or give so many scholarships that young people can actually go to college without coming out with $100,000 worth of debt, because that will not fly in the future. I think the lesson we've learned from saddling the previous generation with so much debt is that there are economic implications we can't even think about.
So I'm going to, this is Peace again, and I'm going to pause for a minute. So we do not actually have, as far as I can see, any questions that have been submitted by the audience. I would encourage folks, if you have something, now will be the time to get those addressed over the next 10 minutes. In the meantime, if Candace, if you are listening, I'd be interested to hear from you in response to what Peter just left off.
Sure.
With discussing affordability and the mix and the college mix and credential mix that you have available and you need in your region.
Right. Well, I certainly agree with Peter. I think that affordability holds the key to a lot of the economic imperatives in our region, and I am hopeful that with the work that Ross is doing and Niall and many other players in the region, that we can increase partnerships between secondary and post-secondary pathways, as well as employers, to establish exactly how post-secondary institutions can benefit the region on the whole and produce employable graduates, so that New England and the Northeast is a place to hold up as a standard for higher education, but also for helping businesses solve a lot of the problems that they face, so that our region can be as productive as possible. So I would love to hear anyone's thoughts about that. Any examples that you would hold high for achieving that sort of goal?
Peace, can I make one more comment?
Peter, go ahead.
Yes. I would suggest, when we talk about collaboration, that it is imperative that the higher education associations, if you want to call them that, of colleges and universities in New England have longer and more regular meetings with their state legislators, particularly in New Hampshire. Ross knows as much better than I do how, quite frankly, stingy the state is about funding higher education, not just the community college system, but the four-year college, State University of New Hampshire. Is woefully underfunded, and they don't even fund, they used to, but they don't even fund high schools. They don't fund secondary education either, and that is a serious mistake. We may not pay much in the way of sales tax or property taxes, but it is really destroying the economy of our state long term by not more fully funding our colleges and university systems, because all of them, all these 250 organizations, are in fact huge economic engines for our 6 states. And I don't think, in fact I am certain, that our state legislatures simply do not understand that simple fact. I don't know what they think about colleges and universities, but they don't think of them as they would think about factories or other kinds of employers. But these colleges and universities aren't just employing a lot of people. They are creating the employees of the future, and they need to be better funded by our states.
Thank you for that. So we have a question where, and perhaps this might be something that Candace or we'll give Ross a shot at, and then Niall or Peter if you wish to weigh in. But the question is, can you discuss the implications that the projections have for graduate student enrollment? Very good question in light of the institutions in the New England states and in the Northeast in particular. Candace, is that something that you would have a perspective on?
Yeah, I think that is a really good point, because I think these projections cause us to think a little bit more closely about what it means for community college and four-year institutions, but I think that a lot of the graduate work that goes on in the region really does propel a lot of the economic activity that happens here as well. I'm thinking particularly about biotech, tech in general, a lot of research fields, a lot of entrepreneurial startup firms as well that come out of some of the graduate programs in the region. So, you know, I'm not 100% sure what the exact projections mean for graduate programs, but if it's anything like what it means for four-year or two-year programs, I think that it's definitely worth considering what the longer-term economic impact of that would be.
Ross, did you want to? Did you have something that you think you might be able to?
Sure. I would follow the pipeline. I emphasize that our community colleges have been focused on from the high schools into our colleges. We have to continue that. We have strong articulation agreements and a program alignment with the University System of New Hampshire, and that leads to the bachelor's degree completion for our graduates. But also we have to connect our community college and our bachelor's programs with graduate programs to have that pipeline of students in the longer term. So I think these relationships across programs along industry and occupational related pathways is going to be increasingly important, and I think it's important to tie it into the regional and state economies so that the educational programming from community college to graduate program is relevant for those regional economies and provide good jobs, employment opportunities for our graduates.
So we do not have another audience question. We're going to begin to wrap this up with maybe a closing question or two. You know, and Niall, I'd like you to speak to something. When we had prepared for this webinar, you had mentioned things like the TRIO program and other sorts of supportive services and whatnot that you, I think, imply or suggest will be especially relevant for the growing population of first-generation students and others of lesser means. And I wonder if you could speak to that part of the equation in solving some of these problems.
Sure. And I know there's IR people on this call who would know these numbers better than I do, but the TRIO programs just serve such a small number of the students who are eligible to be served. And although I can't guess on the federal funding and the politics of this, I can't imagine these programs growing in the future as far as the federal commitment to higher education, but you all might know better than I do. So we're trying to figure out how we can grow locally programs like this. And Boston, just due to its level of funding and level of foundations, has managed to do some really innovative programming, including mentoring on the college level for college freshmen, because we have a lot of our kids who are going on as, you know, freshmen, and they're entering this whole new world, and it's confusing to them, and it's very difficult for them to negotiate. So they're attacking it from the higher ed level. From the K-12 level, we're really talking about like trying to make sure that it encourages districts to have individual learning plans for all students, and to really, we have a use of a statewide free planning portal called Your Plan for the Future, in which they can do some of that planning around college and career and look at universities and things of that nature. And we're really working with our State Counselors Association around career counseling. And career counseling is a much larger piece than at 18 I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. It really is that college is not just a destination, but it's a stop on the way towards a pathway to these big careers that moving on. I think one of the scariest things I read in the past year was the Georgetown Center on Workforce report about the development of jobs in the United States since 2008, and having 90-some% of those jobs requiring a college diploma. So not the new jobs, not the replacement jobs. So we're not talking about replacing the machinist that is aging out of the economy. We're talking about new jobs, and it was terrifying in the fact that we got to get more of these kids going to college. So one of the things we did locally, just to toot our own horn, is we've developed an early warning indicator system for grades 10 through 12 around college enrollment, persistence, meaning going from freshman year to sophomore year, and academic readiness, meaning not taking developmental courses, So we put this in the hands of some school districts so far. It hasn't been wholesalely developed. But to really think about those interventions in grades in high school for kids that may not be likely to attend higher education. So EWIS, as we call it, early win indicators, are going to be a big part of helping to identify these students using data and then develop the interventions that they need to attend college.
More to come on that and other sorts of things. Unfortunately, we have to wrap it up. Thank you for those last thoughts. And I'd like to, at this time, since we are out of time, I'd like to extend a big thank you to the panelists for taking the time to be with us today, and then to all of you who have attended. And we hope that you will take the very brief evaluation as you exit the webinar. It'll help us to evaluate the products that we're providing and to continue to make some available that are useful for you. If you submitted a question that we didn't get to, we'll email you to follow up. And I will actually leave the webinar open for another 5 minutes to receive any more questions that you might wish to submit. All attendees and those who were not able to attend but registered will receive an email notification when the recording of this session is available, and you may also access the slide deck on our website. Please share this information with your colleagues who weren't able to attend today, and feel free to email us at using the information on the website. You can sign up also for email notifications about forthcoming products from the High School Graduate Projection Series. So for that, I will say thank you. Have a great afternoon. Sincere thank you to all who participated. And look out for the email with the version recorded. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.